I've heard people talking about this idea of trauma with a big T and trauma with a little t. But in my opinion, there's no such thing as trauma with a little t. As far as I'm concerned, all trauma has a big T. Let me explain. So these definitions that are floating around big T trauma and little t trauma are all based on the size of the event that leads to the trauma. So big T trauma might arise from major life-threatening events like war or violent crime or natural disasters or serious accidents, whereas little t trauma might come from things like a bad breakup or losing a pet or being bullied or adverse childhood events. And I've got a whole video on adverse childhood events, or ACEs, that you might want to watch so you can understand what they are and how they can affect you. But in my experience, there is no difference between these two kinds of events, not on the effect that they can have on people. And I see two serious problems with defining trauma in these terms. And the first issue I have is that people respond differently to the events that happen to them. When bad things happen to people, they respond differently. You might have two people having the same experience but coming out of it with a totally different set of outcomes. Or let's say you have someone who goes through, say, a natural disaster and they have the resilience to be able to cope with what happens to them. They handle whatever life throws at them. They come out of the other end of this experience okay, maybe even strengthened and growing as a result of that. And you might have someone who has, let's say, a bad breakup, but because of the way they experience that, it fundamentally changes the way they engage with the world. They no longer see the world the same way. They don't cope the same way as they did before. Things have fundamentally changed and they have a lowered ability to handle whatever life throws at them. In that situation, how do you really say which one is the big trauma, which one is the little trauma? The other issue that I see with this is that when we define trauma in terms of big and little, it can make some events seem less important. It's all about perception, how people see that event externally. And in reality, there is no trauma that is better than another trauma. There is no trauma that is more real than another trauma. And I've struggled with this in my own life because I can look back in my own childhood and say, well, my parents, they didn't lock me in a closet, they didn't beat me, they didn't starve me, there were none of those visible outward signs, and yet I know I have in me the effects of the experience I had as a child. And I really struggled with this until I read Pete Walker's book on complex PTSD, and I'll share a link to that. But in that book, he talks about this idea that emotional wounds can actually be the core wound of all childhood trauma, but it's less visible, and so it's easy to discount. And so when we discount our experiences because they don't seem as impressive or as big as the big T traumas, using those labels, we tend to minimize what's happened to us. We say, well, I can't be traumatized because what happened to me wasn't that big or bad. Or we use it as a reason to avoid dealing with the effects that it's having on us and in our lives, so we don't deal with the problems these experiences are causing in our current lives. What really matters at the end of the day is the effect that these experiences have on us. As far as I'm concerned, trauma is trauma. If this bad experience caused something to get stuck in our system, an emotional charge, something got stuck in our energy system, in our bodies, it's trauma. If that event in the past is having an effect on us to this day such that we have a strong emotional response to anything that reminds us of it, so we are triggered by these things and we have a strong emotional response or an emotional flashback, then it's trauma. And I have a whole video on emotional flashbacks if you want to understand better what they are and how they can affect you. So when we get down to brass tacks, all trauma matters, no matter how big the size of the event that led to it. No matter how other people might view that event, what matters is the effect it had on us and the effect that that is continuing to have on us to this day. And as a result, what really matters is reducing the effect of that experience, reducing the trauma's impact on our lives ongoing. And I've got a guide with my favorite techniques for releasing emotional issues that you might want to download. Plus, I've got a video that explains my 5D framework that gives you a process to help you release these issues so they don't impact you as much anymore. And you might want to watch that here. Got questions? Comment below, and I'll see you in the next one.